It is May 14th, 2017. A woman named Isabella Hellmann is on a sailboat in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. She picks up a satellite phone and calls her sister. She sounds fine, happy even. She tells her sister the trip is almost over. They are nearly home. That is the last time anyone ever hears Isabella Hellmann's voice. Within hours, Isabella will be gone. Her husband, Louis Bennett, will be rescued from a life raft, alone. He will have an explanation. He will always have an explanation. But not a single piece of physical evidence will back him up. This is the story of Isabella Hellmann, a woman who sailed into the Caribbean on her honeymoon and never came back, and the investigation that unraveled the truth, piece by devastating piece.
We're in a life vest when you went below that night. We're not positive she was wearing one when she went overboard.
To understand what happened on that boat, you first need to understand who Isabella Hellmann was. Isabella was 41 years old. She lived in Delray Beach, Florida, a coastal city in Palm Beach County, known for its beautiful waterfront and relaxed lifestyle. By all accounts, she was a warm, grounded person, deeply connected to her family. A woman who had built a real life for herself in Florida after coming over from Australia. And by 2017, that life included a daughter, 2-year-old Amelia, and a relatively new relationship with a man named Louis Bennett. Louis Bennett was a British-Australian sailor. He was around the same age as Isabella, early 40s. He had spent years working on yachts and boats in the Caribbean. He knew the sea. He knew how to navigate it, how to read it, how to survive on it. The couple had been together for several years. They had Amelia together. And at some point, they made it official. They got married. Louis and Isabella were newlyweds. They owned a catamaran, a double-hulled sailing vessel called the Surf of Summer. And in early May 2017, Louis proposed a sailing trip. A honeymoon trip, a multi-stop voyage across the Caribbean, starting from St. Martin, sailing to Puerto Rico, then Cuba, and finally looping back toward the Bahamas before returning home to Florida. It sounded like a dream trip, a romantic adventure between two people who had just started a new chapter of their lives together. Their daughter, Amelia, stayed behind in Florida with Isabella's sisters while her parents were away. The couple set off in early May. They moved through the islands as planned, and by May 14th, roughly 2 weeks into the trip, they were on the final leg of the journey. That was the day Isabella called her sister from the satellite phone near Veradero, Cuba. She said they were almost done, almost home. No one in Isabella's family had any reason to worry. And then the night came.
Taking on water, and he couldn't find her. It's certainly a large search area right now.
According to Louis Bennett, this is what happened on the night of May 14th, 2017. The Surf of Summer was sailing through waters approximately 26 nautical miles west of Cape Bank in the Bahamas. Louis said he was below deck, asleep. Isabella was up top, on deck, keeping watch over the vessel as it moved through the night water. And then, he says, there was a collision. Something struck the boat, hard. Louis was jolted awake by the impact. He scrambled up from below deck. The boat was taking on water. It was going down, and Elizabeth was gone. According to Louis, Isabella had been on deck when the impact happened. She must have gone overboard. He searched the water. He called out. Nothing. Louis said he activated the emergency position indicating radio beacon and a personal locator beacon, distress devices that automatically transmit GPS coordinates to emergency services when activated, standard equipment on any ocean-going vessel. He loaded the life raft. He collected supplies, food, water, safety equipment, and then, roughly 45 minutes after the beacons activated, he placed a distress call for help. 45 minutes. That detail will matter a lot. On May 15, 2017, the U.S. Coast Guard located Louis Bennett adrift in international waters. He was alone, in the life raft, alive. Coast Guard crews airlifted him to a hospital in Marathon, Florida. He was evaluated and treated, alive and relatively unharmed. The Coast Guard immediately launched a search for Isabella Hellmann. For 3 days, they searched the waters around the last known position of the Surf of Summer. Aircraft, surface vessels, a full multi-day search across a wide grid of the Caribbean. On May 18th, the search was suspended. No body, no debris, no trace of Isabella Hellmann. But during those days of searching, Coast Guard divers and aircraft had located the sunken wreck of the Surf of Summer on the ocean floor, and they documented it. Photographs, video footage, a detailed visual record of the submerged catamaran. And that documentation, those photographs of a boat sitting silently on the bottom of the Caribbean, would eventually become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. Because what those images showed, and more critically, what they did not show, told a very different story than the one Louis Bennett was telling. Because up to this point, you might be listening to Louis Bennett's version of events and thinking, okay, tragic accident, boat hit something in the dark, woman fell overboard. It happens. The ocean is unforgiving. And you would not be unreasonable for thinking that. But investigators were not thinking that, because investigators were looking at the wreck, and what they found on that boat did not match anything Louis Bennett had told them. Not a single thing. The FBI took over the case relatively quickly after the rescue, and they did something smart. They hired a maritime expert, a specialist in nautical forensics, to examine the Coast Guard's photographs and video footage of the sunken Surf of Summer. Louis Bennett had told investigators that an unknown object struck the vessel, that the collision was what sank the boat, that it was catastrophic, sudden, and unavoidable. The maritime expert looked at every available image of the wreck. There was no evidence of an external impact on the hull. None. No scrape marks, no collision damage, no cracking or fracturing consistent with striking a large underwater object at sailing speed. The kind of collision violent enough to jolt a man awake from sleep below deck, to send a woman overboard, to sink a double-hulled catamaran. That kind of collision leaves marks. It leaves evidence. There were no marks. And the search teams had found something else equally important. No debris field. When a vessel sinks rapidly due to a catastrophic collision at sea, it leaves a surface debris field. Personal effects, floating materials, something. The Coast Guard found nothing on the surface. No floating objects, no debris that could explain what Louis Bennett claimed happened to his boat. No other vessels were detected anywhere near the area that night. No reports of a collision, no witnesses, nothing to support even the basic framework of Louis Bennett's story. Investigators also looked more closely at the timeline Louis had provided. He said the beacons had activated, the EPIRB and the PLB. Those devices had pinged. Satellites had detected them. The Coast Guard had their location. But Louis Bennett did not place a distress call for approximately 45 minutes after those beacons first activated. Think about that for a moment. Your boat is sinking. Your wife has gone overboard. You are in the middle of the ocean. Every second matters. Every second someone might be able to reach Isabella could mean the difference between finding her and losing her. And Louis Bennett waited 45 minutes to call for help. What was he doing for those 45 minutes? According to investigators, he was loading the life raft. Food, water, standard safety supplies. All of that makes sense. You would expect a sailor to bring those things. But Louis Bennett also loaded something else. Gold and silver coins. Stolen gold and silver coins. Coins that prosecutors would later allege Lewis Bennett had taken from his employer in St. Martin, the place where this sailing trip had begun, while the catamaran was sinking, while his wife was presumably in the water somewhere out in the dark Caribbean night. Lewis Bennett spent 45 minutes making sure those stolen coins were safe in the life raft with him.
Don't see things like these happen, you know. We know that we all gonna die, but this is just the weirdest thing ever.
This is where prosecutors built their theory of what actually happened on that boat. Before the trip began, back in St. Martin, Lewis Bennett stole from his employer gold coins, silver coins, valuables that he then loaded aboard the Surf of Summer and carried along the honeymoon trip. Now think about what that means for Isabella. If Isabella knew about the stolen coins, or discovered them during the trip, she was now potentially an unwitting participant in a smuggling operation. Carrying stolen valuables across international waters through multiple countries is a serious crime. Prosecutors alleged that this may have been the breaking point, that Isabella found out or confronted Lewis, and that Lewis made a decision in response to that confrontation, a decision that ended Isabella Hellmann's life. Now, this is important. Lewis Bennett was never convicted of murder. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, and in the American legal system, the distinction matters. But the family of Isabella Hellmann, her sisters, her mother, they were not operating on legal distinctions. They were operating on grief. And they believed from the very beginning that what happened on that boat was not an accident. And as investigators dug deeper, they found more things that didn't add up. Lewis Bennett was an experienced sailor. He had spent years at sea. He knew the equipment. He knew the protocols. He knew what it meant to sail from one country to another across open international waters. And yet, his PLB, his personal locator beacon, had not been properly registered before the trip. The satellite phone had not been used until the vessel was near Cuba. For a multi-leg voyage through multiple nations, these were not minor oversights. These were the kind of failures that sailing experts found deeply suspicious. Why would an experienced sailor neglect the basic safety registrations for an open ocean voyage? One possible answer: because he didn't intend to need them. Or, more precisely, he didn't intend for one of the passengers to need them.
You killed my sister. You killed my sister. No, Vina. No, mi niña.
After Lewis Bennett was treated at the hospital in Marathon, he was released. And within a very short time, before investigators had even begun to fully process what had happened, Lewis Bennett made a series of decisions that would come to define how the case was perceived. First, he went to collect his daughter Amelia from Isabella's sisters in Florida. Isabella's sisters had been caring for the 2-year-old while her parents were on the sailing trip. They were heartbroken. They had just lost their sister, and now Lewis was there to take Amelia. And then he left the country. Lewis Bennett took Amelia and flew to his parents' home in Scotland. He did not ask Isabella's family if they wanted to be involved. He did not coordinate with them. He did not say, "Let's figure this out together." He took Amelia and left. And once he was in Scotland, with a young child across the Atlantic out of reach, Isabella's family found it extraordinarily difficult to access their niece, their granddaughter, a little girl who had just lost her mother. For Isabella's family, this was not the behavior of a grieving husband. This was the behavior of a man trying to control the narrative, trying to put distance between himself and the scrutiny that was coming. And the scrutiny did come. I want to pause here for a moment and think about Isabella's family. Because while investigators were building a case, and while Lewis Bennett was across an ocean in Scotland, Isabella's sisters and mother were in Florida, grieving, uncertain of what had happened to their person, with no body to bury, no confirmed answer, nothing. And the little girl who connected them to Isabella, Amelia, was out of reach. They knew Lewis had taken her. They knew his parents in Scotland were with her. And there is something particularly painful about that, about knowing that there is this small child somewhere, a child who carries your sister's face or your daughter's laugh, and you cannot get to her. Isabella's family eventually wrote a letter, a formal, documented letter expressing their pain over the limited access to Amelia, noting that Lewis knew firsthand how central Isabella's family had been to Amelia's early life, her first years, her first words, her first steps, and that after everything, after losing Isabella, they were now being cut off from the last living connection to her. Keep that in mind as we move forward. Federal prosecutors in the United States filed charges against Lewis Bennett. The initial charge was murder, a federal murder charge filed in Miami. Lewis Bennett returned from Scotland to face the charges. He was taken into custody, and the legal process began. His legal team negotiated, prosecutors weighed the evidence, and ultimately, in a familiar pattern in complex cases where a body has never been recovered and direct physical evidence of cause of death is limited, a plea deal was reached. Lewis Bennett pleaded guilty, not to murder, to federal involuntary manslaughter. The distinction, legally speaking, is significant. Involuntary manslaughter means that a person caused the death of another through criminal negligence, conduct that showed a reckless disregard for human life, but without the intent to kill required for a murder conviction. In other words, Lewis Bennett did not have to admit that he intended to kill Isabella, but he did have to admit that his conduct, his negligence, his failures, his actions that night caused her death. At sentencing, Lewis Bennett's attorneys asked the court for 7 years. The argument was personal, even emotional. His daughter Amelia was still very young. Every year of incarceration was a year away from her. The judge rejected that request. Lewis Bennett was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The sentencing judge noted that Isabella Hellmann's death resulted from Lewis Bennett's gross negligence, conduct amounting to a wanton and reckless disregard for human life. He had foreseen the risks, he had the ability to act differently, he had the experience, the knowledge, and the equipment to have responded in a way that could have saved his wife's life. And he did not. For Isabella's family, who believed throughout the entire proceeding that what Lewis had done was not negligence but murder, 8 years was not justice. It was an acknowledgement that something terrible had happened, but it was not the full truth as they saw it. No body, no murder conviction. 8 years for manslaughter. For a 41-year-old woman who called her sister from a satellite phone, said she was almost home, and was never heard from again. Because Isabella Hellmann's body was never recovered, a court had to formally declare her dead. In 2019, a judge issued a ruling officially declaring Isabella Hellmann presumed dead. The estate proceedings that followed were, in some ways, a second layer of pain for Isabella's family. The estate included the couple's condominium in Delray Beach, the home where Isabella had lived, where she had built her life, where she had raised Amelia in her earliest years. The court awarded a sum of $18,000 from Isabella's estate to Amelia, and the keys to Delray Beach condo were given to Lewis Bennett's parents, the same grandparents now raising her in Scotland. Isabella's family received the outcome of the estate, and they wrote again about their pain, about the lost access to Amelia, about how Lewis, before everything collapsed, had known how deeply Isabella's own family had been woven into Amelia's early life, how they had been there at the beginning, and now they were being closed out. There is something particularly cruel about that part of the story, because even after the criminal case, even after the sentence, the consequences for Isabella's family kept going. The grief did not have a final chapter. No body to bury. No clear answer as to what exactly happened on that boat. No full access to the little girl who carried Isabella's legacy forward. There are questions about this case that have never been fully answered, and I think it's worth sitting with them. The first question is the most obvious one. What actually happened on that boat? Lewis Bennett's account, the collision story, was dismantled by a maritime forensics expert hired by the FBI. The expert's conclusion, backed by photographic and video evidence of the wreck, was that the vessel showed no signs of external impact damage consistent with the collision Bennett described. So if there was no collision, then what sank the Surf of Summer? And where was Isabella when it happened? The prosecution's theory, built around the stolen coins, offered a possible answer. Isabella may have discovered the extent of what Lewis had done. Not just a small theft, but a smuggling operation carried across multiple countries on their honeymoon voyage. That discovery may have led to a confrontation, and that confrontation may have led Lewis to make a decision. But Lewis Bennett never admitted to murder. He admitted only to the legal standard of gross negligence. And so the precise sequence of events on that boat in the dark Caribbean night remains, officially, at least, unknown. The second question is about Amelia. Amelia was 2 years old when her mother disappeared. By 2026, she would be approximately 9 years old, growing up in Scotland with Lewis Bennett's parents as her legal guardians. What does she know? What has she been told? Is she in contact with her mother's family, her aunts, her grandmother, the people who cared for her in those first 2 years of her life while Isabella was still alive? The record suggests that Isabella's family arranged at least one overseas visit, but the pain expressed in the letters they wrote to the court suggests their access was far more limited than they wanted, far more limited than Isabella would have wanted. And the third question, the one that is perhaps the most quietly unsettling, is about what Isabella knew before she died. She called her sister the afternoon of May 14th. She was near Cuba. She was happy. She said they were almost home. Did she know, in that phone call, that there were stolen coins on the boat? Did she know the full scope of what Lewis had been doing? Did she have any idea that by the time midnight came, she would be gone? Almost home. Those words, almost home. They were the last words her family ever heard her say, and they carry a weight that is very hard to put down. Isabella Hellmann was 41 years old. She had a 2-year-old daughter. She had sisters who loved her. A mother, a community in Delray Beach, Florida, where she had planted herself and built a life. She went on a honeymoon sailing trip with the man she had married, and she never came back. Her body has never been found. The full truth of what happened has never been officially confirmed. The man responsible for her death served a sentence that her family believed did not reflect the gravity of what he did. And somewhere, in Scotland, a little girl named Amelia is growing up. She is 9 or 10 years old now. She has her whole life ahead of her. And somewhere in that life, she is going to have to reckon with who her mother was, with what happened on that boat, with the fact that her mother called her sister on a satellite phone and said she was almost home. I think about that a lot when I look at cases like this one. If this story kept you on edge, hit subscribe for more tales from the shadows. And stick around. The next one's even stranger.